One of the most significant executions of the Second World War took place on the 29th of April 1945 outside the walls of a villa near to Lake Como in Italy. Benito Mussolini, the former Italian Fascist Dictator, was stood with his mistress after they had been told to get out of a vehicle by a man who would become their executioner. The pair were told to stand by a wall, and they were then littered by machine gun bullets. However, this was not the end of their story. The pair were then taken to Milan, where their remains were spat at and kicked by an angry mob before Mussolini and his mistress were strung up upside down from a service station inside of the Italian city. Thousands witnessed the sight and spectacle, and it had a huge effect on Hitler and his future wife, Eva Braun. As decisions were taken to ensure their remains were not likely to fall into the hands of the enemy. But Clara Petacci was also subjected to the brutality of the crowd. Clara's body was exhumed from a grave where she had been interred under a false name, and there had been whispers as to the fact her body had been stolen and that items placed inside of her coffin and tomb had also been robbed. But what is the story behind this? Clara Petacci was the most prominent mistress of Benito Mussolini, and as mentioned, she remained with him whilst he was standing facing his death at the end of the war. Petacci was from a high-profile family, and her father was a doctor to the Pope and the Vatican, and they were very well connected, and they were close to the Catholic Church. But Petacci and her sister were strong supporters of Benito Mussolini, and they were obsessed with him for many years. And as a young girl, Clara was infatuated with the dictator, and she wrote him love letters and claimed that she would have saved him when he faced threats to his life in the form of an assassination attempt. Clara Petacci was blindsided by her love and desire to meet the fascist dictator, and she wrote in one of these letters, "Oh Deuce, why was I not with you? Could I not have strangled that murderous woman?" in response to an assassination attempt. But the first time she met Mussolini was by pure chance, and it was sheer luck that this happened on the 24th of April 1932. Clara and Mussolini then struck up a relationship from this, despite the fact that Mussolini was married, as was Clara, and he was at the time 49, and he had already bore 5 children with his wife. But throughout his life he was known to have had a number of mistresses. But Petacci married an Italian military officer, Lieutenant Riccardo Federici, and their marriage only lasted 2 years, and the couple had split up, but they were not permitted to divorce. Around this time things really ramped up between Petacci and Mussolini, and she visited him more often, and she would stay inside a small apartment which was rented under her name, and Mussolini regularly visited her, and he paid for this. But Clara and Mussolini became very close, and he believed that she was the only woman who knew the real Ben, as she referred to him. She moved in with him into a 32-room villa inside of Rome, which was very lavish, and this villa, despite having a pool and much luxury, was also fitted with a bomb shelter for their own safety. This was all brought with the Italian taxpayers' money, and the villa would later be taken from the dictator when he fell from grace and power. But following the Second World War turning against the Italians, as the Allies invaded and landed on the mainland, Mussolini was kicked out of power and was voted out by the Grand Fascist Council, and a number of his old allies turned against him, and Mussolini then, when he was later given some form of power in the north, had some retribution, as he executed some of those men who crossed him. Clara Petacci feared for her safety, and she travelled to the north of Italy, and the Italian Socialist Republic, which was then headed up by Mussolini, who was placed in power by Hitler, and this was a Nazi puppet state. Clara and Mussolini got back together, and their villa was notoriously guarded by a number of officers from the brutal SS. but then her family would flee Italy in the April of 1945, as they knew that they would be implicated with the former dictator, and they also knew that Mussolini's links would put them in danger. But Clara Petacci did not go to Spain with her family. She remained with the man she loved, and the pair knew that the war was coming to a conclusion, and that would not benefit them. And with this, Mussolini and Petacci then made efforts to try and save themselves. The plan was for the pair to try and get to Switzerland and then cross the border. Clara had a suitcase packed with her clothes, however, she would never make it to Switzerland. The pair had then boarded a convoy of Luftwaffe officers who were headed back to Germany following failed attempts to cross the border. This convoy would take them back to Berlin, and they believed that Hitler would welcome them with open arms and give them some form of protection. But the convoy was stopped by Italian fascists, and then Mussolini and Petacci were discovered, and they were then arrested. And the announcement of their capture sent shockwaves all around Europe. Many in Italy were very happy and made up with this. But then the pair would be executed. Italian fascists appointed Walter Ordizio to execute Petacci and Mussolini, and they were both shot dead by a machine gun outside of the Villa Belmont. There were concerns as to why Clara was shot, and this was because she was close to the dictator, and she was seen as a symbol of fascism. Clara's brother was also executed, and his corpse was put on the same truck that transported Clara and Mussolini's remains into Milan. They were then dumped in the Piazzale Loretta, a public square where a half-built service station was found, but the remains of Petacci and Mussolini were then subjected to a brutal ordeal. They were kicked, beaten, spat at, had rocks thrown at them, and even shot at, and then Petacci's body, alongside her lover's, was hoisted upside down and secured to the service station, and it was left hanging. The American soldiers then arrived, and her remains were cut down, and Petacci's eyes were wide open and were glazed over, and she was unrecognisable because of the treatment of her remains by the crowd. The Roman Catholic Cardinal of Milan had tried to get the remains taken down, but Clara's body was placed inside of a wood coffin and was then moved into the mortuary in the city. A photographer then arrived, and he took images and moved the remains and showed them linked arm in arm. Mussolini and Petacci joined together in death. But a short examination of her body said that she had been shot dead, as was mentioned, but no autopsy was performed on her remains, and she was then put inside of a cheap wooden coffin and was then buried on the 30th of April 1945 under a false name, Rita Colfosco, which was a pseudonym she had used throughout her life. However, that same day across Europe, Hitler and his wife would take their own lives inside of the Führerbunker in Berlin. But Clara Petacci's body was left inside of the grave for 11 years, and her burial remains a secret, but she was then exhumed and disinterred, and the Petacci family had deemed it safe to return from Spain to Italy, and they ordered the removal of Clara's body, and this was then moved to the Verano Cemetery in Rome. She was moved to give her a more respectable and high-profile burial, and was actually interred inside a pink marble tomb, and on top of this was a marble statue. But over the years this managed to fall into a sense of decay, and in 2015 it was said that it was in a very bad way and had been neglected, as the family did not care for it. Restoration work for Petacci's tomb was carried out in 2017, but there was a possibility that she would have had to have been exhumed and been buried in another place, because the family would not pay for it, and there were no descendants who were willing to take this on. But there was only a small amount of people each year who visited her tomb, and Mussolini's was being visited by hundreds of thousands each year. But there was a rumour within the Petacci family relating to Clara's tomb and also coffin. There were rumours at the time that her corpse had been exhumed by her family, and this was because they had allegedly been jewels hidden in her skirt, and it was rumoured that some of these valuables had been stolen from Jews who were sent to the concentration camps. But this was just a rumour, and it does offer the possibility that her tomb may have been disturbed during the decay to look for valuable items. Clara Petacci was the long-standing mistress of Benito Mussolini, and she was a woman who rose to the position she dreamed of, the lover of the fascist dictator of Italy. But she remained with him until the war had come to an end for the pair, and she was willing to die alongside Mussolini when she had the chance to escape and survive the war. However, still today, Clara's tomb is not the best preserved, and her family did not want to pay to keep this in a good state, and they may have also wanted to distance themselves from Mussolini. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.